Good afternoon. Good morning. I am Irene Alfaro. On behalf of our PEL, I welcome you to this webinar, which is called Powering an Increasingly Decarbonized World. Before we start, we have simultaneous interpretation into English and from English into Spanish. Please check to see if you have the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. Click the globe icon and choose your language of preference. During this webinar, you will be introduced to the two instructors who will be in charge of our forthcoming ARPEL Leadership Program, Module 3, from the 22nd to the 24th of October in Monterrey, Mexico. This module is called Gas and Renewable Energies, their role as energetic fuel in a growingly decarbonized world. I will now very briefly introduce the two instructors. We have two of the three trainers who will be working at this module. One of them is Marcela Rosas, Director for Gas, Energy and Climate Solutions for Latin America, working for S&P Global. The three instructors come from S&P Global. They are part of all modules in our programs. They develop the contents of the ARPEL Leadership Program. Marcela is an expert in fundamental analysis and outlooks for the Latin American market, and she even elaborates different scenarios. She works on gas simulation models to project markets for gas demand and the flow of gas pipelines. She has worked in the North American gas sector, and she's now devoted to the Andean and Southern Cone markets. She has an MBA from the Autonomous Institute in Mexico and a master's degree from the Colorado School of Mines and the French Petroleum Institute. Today, we also have David Crisostomo, Director for Gas and Energy in Latin America, S&P Global. He's an expert in gas and energy markets in Mexico. He has also worked in the Andean region. His research and analysis includes gas and electricity markets, modeling, analysis of regulatory frameworks, and implications for trade opportunities. David's research has covered transportation of natural gas, potential of energy distributed in Mexico and Latin America, investment opportunities, energy transmission, valuation of assets, and operational strategies to invest in public service, financial institutions, and other participants in the market. Having introduced both instructors, I now give them the floor. He will give you an overview of what the module will include. Let us start with David. David, what are the main or current burning topics relative to electric energy and the renewable energy sources and the role of natural gas in the electric sector? Well, thank you, Irene. And I also thank you for this invitation. I'm happy to be part of the ARPEL Leadership Program. It's very important, and we are here to tell you about the program and answer questions that are flowing around. There's a lot of information everywhere about what's going on in the world today and how energy markets change in order to adapt to all these changes. You asked me about the electric sector and renewable energies and natural gas as a parallel sector. Marcela will devote to this parallel sector. We have always seen the electric sector as an objective when we talk about an effort to decarbonize and to push forward clean energy. We know that the transport sector is one of the sectors that produces the most emissions released into the atmosphere. However, in our experience after an analysis, most progress is achieved in the electric sector, given the scale of its of the impact when you change from one source of energy like fossil fuels to another that is cleaner. However, there are different aspects that have been emerging given the migration worldwide when we move from fossil fuels to cleaner energies, natural gas among them. And these are the aspects that we need to study more in depth to adapt them, to align them better in order to achieve our objectives. In many cases, the world has not been able to achieve objectives. In the case of renewable energies as clean sources, they have made the most progress in recent years. We are constantly tracking the evolution of these technologies and we compare them to what is happening in the oil and gas sector, which is still very important at the economic level. But in terms of this new approach, when investment decisions are to be made and public policies are to be issued, we have seen that over the years, um, investment in wind energy, for example, is higher than investment in oil and gas activities. However, this does not mean that we are facing relevance, the loss of relevance. Nevertheless, it is important to point out that sun and wind energy are becoming more and more important in the development of energy markets, especially in terms of electricity. Now, this accelerated development has already brought about certain challenges to our operations and also to development of technologies. In some markets, we have seen that permits become a factor that hampers or slows down the development of certain projects. And governments, in coordination with industry, are trying to find a solution because in some countries, I could mention Mexico as one case, this is an issue that causes a great impact in the development of projects. And this is not a problem only in Latin America. This is part of the trend worldwide. And we are observing them, and we need to understand the implications of this change of an energy matrix. Another important aspect regarding renewable energies and their share in this electricity sector has to do with transmission. We know that the renewable resource tends to have specific locations, especially the wind energy, which is far from consumption centers. And given the growing development of these technologies in recent years, we are exhausting those transmission points or the capacity to transmit this energy. And we see that there is a gradual stoppage in its growth. So this is becoming very important. There are different solutions that have been suggested worldwide to solve this problem. There are countries that are inviting for legal tenders to really solve this problem of wind energy transmission. And there are other alternatives that are being found, like developing batteries as an emerging technology, which is at a very incipient stage, and it needs more regulations to become feasible. But this could be a competitive technology in terms of cost. However, all of these needs to move forward gradually so that we can reach our objectives in time. Another important factor regarding electric markets operation has to do with the high renewable penetration and the profile of solar energy production. Maybe you heard about the Pareto curve, which is residual demand if you discount the share of the generation profile of solar energy, which requires much flexibility in the system so that reliability can be maintained. These are ideas that countries have used to stop, to slow down the development of these technologies. They refer to the operational impact, and this requires new and existing technologies to compensate these variability issues. And this requires changes in the legal framework, in the trade-offs, so that the existing technologies can somehow continue being competitive. In some markets, when there is high penetration of renewable energy, when there is a fuel of low cost like natural gas, the thermal plants start losing competitiveness. They have less burden factors, and the compensation mechanisms may not be adequate. So when we go over what is going on in the world today and where the world is moving to, we see that this technological change that we try to foster to reduce carbon emissions will continue requiring adaptation, improvement of legal frameworks in all markets so that we can capture all these challenges that emerge. And I will talk about natural gas because I said in the beginning that in terms of flexibility and less impact, less emissions into the climate, into the environment, natural gas has emerged and has allowed for this transition. In the case of Asia, where they use a lot of carbon to generate electric energy, natural gas has helped take a first step. This is not the case of the United States or Europe. This happened a long time before. And they are now looking for new solutions that are even cleaner so that they can continue their transition. But in Asia, well, this is a fuel that is helping the change. And eventually, in an aim to grow and expand the energy matrix, natural gas will provide the flexibility that the electric sector requires in Asia. And we need to monitor, to observe the evolution of the global gas market, which is led by liquefied natural gas. In Mexico, which is closer to a low-cost gas source, other countries need to pay additional overcharges in terms of transportation or liquefaction. So this is an economic factor that needs to be taken into account. We need to carry out a deep analysis to understand the real impact of this change in the medium and long terms if we want to reduce emissions. Now, being more punctual, what we see in the region, there are two markets which are the focus in Latin America. One is Mexico, the second is Brazil. For different reasons, both markets have different development paces or rhythm. In Mexico, in the previous administration, we experienced a boom in the penetration of renewable energies. There were mechanisms that really allowed to develop an industry that could offer competitive prices to supply electric energy. Unfortunately, under the current administration, there was a change, and we saw again a new approach in developing natural gas for Mexico. This seems to be ideal as a solution because it's probably a country envied by the rest of the world because we have very cheap access to natural gas, $2, $3 per million BTU, while other countries have to pay overcharges to access natural gas. But we see, as we look into the future, we are about to start with a new administration that is considering taking up the clean generation of energy. And we need to pay attention as to how to facilitate permits, enhance transmission. And I think this is going to be an important change for the forthcoming government in my country if it wishes to move towards clean energy. The second case is Brazil. Brazil is a very important market with a high concentration of hydroelectric energy, and they have pushed the wind potential in recent years, and also they have solar potential. And they have focused on mechanisms to invite legal tenders, and they were developed to really work on this new energy that was stagnant for some time. So as we move forward, these mechanisms will work for Brazil. Brazil will experience an important development in wind and solar energy, but they will not depend so much on hydroelectric energy because of changes in rainfall patterns and the impact it causes in markets such as Brazil and Colombia. Colombia is also having a high hydroelectric concentration, and they need a flexible source, controllable source like natural gas sources. So natural gas in Brazil and in many other countries of the region will continue being the fuel that provides flexibility. Early this year, we organized a conference in Panama in my company, and many smaller countries are exposed to this rainfall variability, and natural gas was considered a technology that is important in this sense, as it is flexible. So this is an overview of the important topics that we will deal in terms of electricity. Thank you, David. Now we invite Marcela. We'll go specifically into natural gas. Could you summarize the main issues where we need to focus as an oil and gas sector of the region? Well, thank you, Irene, for having invited us. Thank you, David. David mentioned already that natural gas is the most resistant of hydrocarbons for this energy transition of the electric sector in Latin America. In Latin America, the electric sector is the highest consumer of natural gas. Due to the factors that David mentioned. It's a real motor for growth. But natural gas is not only used to generate electricity, it's also used as fuel, as input in the industrial sector, to produce food stuff, to heat houses and businesses, for transportation as well. So if we look at the total consumption in Latin America, it's quite low compared to global consumption. In 2023, Latin America used a little bit over 6% of the gas that was produced. However, it's one of the regions with the highest growth potential according to our projections. It can be compared to the United States, where the largest market it is the largest market of the world, and it will get to a domestic peak consumption, which will be the highest in the world. And if compared to Europe, the domestic demand already reached a peak a few years ago. And this has to do with several reasons. that go against global trends in a way. We see that exploratory activity in hydrocarbons has been reduced. There are important reserves of hydrocarbons. Uh, there are regulations and political environments that are favorable to the exploitation of hydrocarbon production. And this has to do with their exploration, production, and exports. Now, if we focus on natural gas, we see that governments and stakeholders in the gas markets of the region are increasing production, expanding transportation networks and distribution networks somehow to substitute for those hydrocarbons with a stronger carbon footprint, or to improve the quality of life of populations, because in many homes they use fuels that may harm their health. Now, to answer your question, Irene, we must remember that Latin American gas markets are not homogeneous. We have all sizes. Some are small markets where the use of natural gas is just beginning. Others are more mature markets, with the exception of markets such as Peru, Bolivia, even Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean. Most markets are net importers of gas through international pipelines or through LNG, as we call it in English. So it is important to remember that this LNG plays a very important role as well in our markets. In fact, the capacity to regasify in Latin America and the Caribbean has increased over 80% in recent years. Amazing. Brazil stands out. This year only, they inaugurated 3 regasification plants, which are new. So the 4 regions in Brazil that have access to the coast have at least 1 regasification terminal. As David says, LNG plays a very important role because it allows us for storing and keeping this in Brazil, because it depends a lot on variabilities for the generation of electricity. Now, this year, we see contracts for LNG, even for local distribution companies in some countries. Now, prices paid for LNG, David referred to this. These prices are either indexed according to international prices or reflect the differences across regions, North America, Europe, Asia, plus the cost of freight. So these prices are higher than local production. And as we increase regasification or the capacity to regasify, we open the doors to other international dynamics that may cause volatility in prices, as we saw in 2002, when, as a result of the intensification of the war between Russia and Ukraine, the markets in the southern coast were importing at an average of $30 per BTU. Now the market has regained this balance. However, there are some tensions, which means that prices may go up if there is a peak in the demand or an interruption in the production of LNG. So within this context, I will answer your question now. The topics that we include in our analysis today are regulatory changes in Brazil, which started 3 years ago when they passed a new gas act to create a more liquid competitive market, and eventually so they could have a better gas prices. Also, regulatory changes occurring in Argentina with the new administration of Javier Milei. That's very important because it has a potential. Argentina used to be a net importer and it could be a net exporter, and it can play an important integration role in the Latin American markets now that the Bolivian production is in a slump. There are economic cycles, and the rate of demand growth depends on those. Political cycles are also important, like the tragic situation of Venezuela. It may even have implications in terms of the flow of gas towards Trinidad and Tobago. Also, decarbonization is important. David mentioned the electric sector, but there is potential and competition in certain industrial processes or in transportation or even in residential sector. I understand that in Chile there was a pilot program to combine hydrogen and methane in local distribution networks. And we also have to look at decarbonization in terms of supply. In Brazil, renewable natural gas, especially as a product coming from the waste in agricultural activity, it started as something very tiny, but it has a potential to grow. Finally, apart from inter-regional integration, we have international integration, and we follow it close by. And we need to mention that we look forward to a coming new wave of liquid to produce LNG. This capacity will increase between 7 and 8% annually. This is important, and this is what we see on the basis of ongoing projects. Depending on how demand evolves in Europe and in Asia, it may have consequences on prices for our markets. So these are the topics that we will focus in the course. Very complete, Marcela. Thank you. Last question to David. In 2 minutes that we have left, how are you going to focus all these topics in the next module 3 of the ARPEL leadership program? Well, as you said in the introduction, Irene, Marcela and I belong to S&P Global, and we work conducting research on a daily basis. I will mention 5 pillars that will help us deal with all these subjects. One pillar is that we need to understand the market fundamentals, supply and demand, prices. We need to understand, as we analyze all these markets, what role these factors play. This will be the point of departure. Then we'll talk about regulatory frameworks, public policies. Marcela mentioned the political cycles in Latin America, which are very important to our markets. And in this module, we approach the importance of this second pillar as something fundamental for energy in general, but punctually for electricity and natural gas. Thirdly, costs and technological development. We need to understand how to approach all the solutions that are raised in terms of efforts to reduce emissions, but they all have a very important component relative to costs, and we need to understand costs. Because when we try to estimate for the future, they play an important role. In the fourth place, competitiveness at the level of markets, and this is connected to legal and regulatory issues. We need to understand the competitive landscape, how the market is structured, who are the main stakeholders, how they interact, how they compete, how this has an incidence in decision making for public policy and for investment policies, and their impact on the development of electric and natural gas markets. And then future projections. We'll talk about the future, how we see it, why we see it in this way. We'll do drills with different scenarios following different assumptions. We analyze the energy sector on a global level under different scenarios. It is important for us to assess the impact of a war, the impact of a technological development, the impact of an international policy on clean energy, for example. So the scenarios will help us understand the potential implications of a more accelerated development or a stronger commitment in this type of situation. We'll have case studies, we'll have sessions where the participants in the module will be able to use the different concepts, we'll bring real cases, things that we have found in our practice, in our experience, and where new regulations will be developed, where new investment strategies will be applied, or things that are connected to assets. We combine theoretical concepts that are based on our experience and our daily practice in a working group, and we'll bring practical cases so that you see how all these ideas are applied. Excellent summary, David. Let me tell you that this program is face-to-face. We have a classroom, we have dynamics led by the instructors, as David said. We analyze real business cases, we do role playing, we do field visits in the region. In addition, participants will be incorporated to the alumni network of the program that has today over 60 top executives coming from the region, and they have access to special updating activities. Arpel is here to serve you. If you have further requests of information, you can get in touch with us. The next module 3 will take place from October 22nd to October 24th in Monterrey, Mexico. Please get in touch with us. Please visit our social networks and our YouTube channel, where you will find recordings of all of our webinars. We have the Arpel website where you can consult our schedule of different events and courses. Having completed these 2 presentations, I thank David and Marcella. Thank you all for participating. Have a wonderful day ahead of you.